Well, good afternoon, guys, and today I got a guide to some of the common species of plant you can find growing along the Logan River Trail. Starting with this one, this is Betula occidentalis, also known as water birch. As the name implies, it likes growing in watery, riparian areas such as along the Logan River, and if you're wondering what riparian means, it's basically a fancy way of saying riverside, or having to do with rivers. So a riparian forest is a forest that grows along a river. That's what its bark looks like, an important feature in telling it apart from other tree species. And we're seeing a lot of riparian species today because of the nature of its trail. It runs, as the name implies, right along the Logan River, sort of at the mouth of Logan Canyon. Another common tree you can find here is this one. This is Acer negundo. This is what its leaves look like. They are what's known as compound, so this is actually a whole leaf. It's not free leaves, it is a leaf with free segments known as leaflets, and it is actually a type of maple that likes to grow, as I already said, along rivers. It's a very widespread one. It can be found all over North America and even into Mexico and Central America. And sort of to round off these trees for now, we got this. This is more of a shrub, but this is red osier dogwood, also known as Cornus sericea. You can really see why it's got that name when you actually see its younger shoots like this. They are a very bright red, and it's super distinctive in winter against the snow. I made a great video on how to identify these plants in the winter time, by the way. And it also has opposite branches, so this branch is opposite to another branch. Now, not every time you look at this you'll find opposite branches, because occasionally they fall off or sort of grow out of this habitat. But that is more or less what they tend to do and what they look like. That's actually a very important feature for identifying trees and wildflowers and the like. Looking on the other side of the trail, the mountainside, you get some different plant species because of different habitat, a drier one. And one of the common ones you can see here, this is one of the most common vines you'll see along this trail, is Clematis ligusticifolia, also known as virgin's bower. It is a member of the family Ranunculaceae, which is a very common one in the northern hemisphere, and one that's notably very toxic. That's sort of its leaves look like, and it used to climb and crawl all over plants. All this dead woody tissue you can see here is some Clematis ligusticifolia from different years. Some other plants I'm seeing around here are this one. It's a bit of a weird sight to see this, but this is Rubus parviflorus, also known as Thimbleberry. Now, Rubus is the genus of plants that includes blackberries, raspberries, and its relatives. So as you might imagine, this produces some very tasty edible berries. Its leaves are quite large and big and not compound, unlike most members of Rubus. And it's also not thorny like most members of Rubus, so that's an important thing to know about it. The only thing I can say about the berries is that they're quite nice, but they also are a little bit kind of tart in a weird way. They kind of shock the mouth. This is a very busy trail, by the way, so you're always going to be seeing people coming up and down it. I'm trying not to notice, because I don't like filming around people too much, but you know, it doesn't really matter that much at the end of the day now, does it? Really great plant species. Now, in terms of non-natives, one of the most common, in fact, probably by far the most common species I'm seeing is this guy. I think you all know what this is. It's the common dandelion, also known as Taraxacum officinale, if you want to go by the scientific name for this one. And you can just see them pretty much everywhere along here. It's become such a common plant in North America. I mean, all I can say is I'm really thankful it's not a particularly nasty invasive weed, because it is freaking everywhere. Now, theoretically, it is displacing native plant species, but it just has some characteristics that make it not so bad as other invasive species, some of which I might be talking about later. Here's some more of the Clematis ligusticifolia. There might be a better view of its young shoots. Now, riparian habitat is always pretty important because it acts as a sort of refuge, especially in dry locations such as Utah. Different plant species can thrive here due to the abundance of water, so it increases the local biodiversity. And a lot of animals depend upon the water, especially just the straight up river, because you know, it's a source of water you can drink from. Many plant species here are specifically adapted to it and can't grow anywhere else, even in places with super high rainfall. So like cottonwoods, box elders, birches all depend upon the water provided by these riparian sites. Now, the most important non-riparian tree species you'll find around here is this. This is Acer grandidentatum, also known as the Bigtooth Maple. It is a very common species of maple, probably the most common in Utah, and it makes up the entirety of this little forest right here. It is a very important component of what's known as the mountain brush community, which is basically a community of plants that you find sort of below the conifer forest, areas that are maybe not semi-arid, but not super mesic either. They sort of exist on the boundary between dry and not dry, elevations from around 4,000 to 6,000 feet, at least in the state of Utah. So exactly where we are right now, we're at about 4,800 feet along the Logan River at this point. And another important plant species I'm seeing in this understory and along the river is this one. This is a species of Maianthemum, also known as Solomon seal. What exact species it is, I can't really say right now because it's not in flower. There are two common species you see around here, stellatum and racemosum. One has, mainly racemosum, has a more complicated inflorescence. That is the group of flowers it produces at the end. So it's starting to go off, but I think this might be racemosum. So it looks more like racemosum to me. But again, they can kind of tricky to tell apart without well-developed flowers. Another plant I'm seeing very commonly along this trail is our common native rose. This is Rosa woodsii, also known as woods rose. Unlike some of the introduced ornamental roses you see around here, this plant is different because firstly, it doesn't get too tall, usually not more than 4 feet. It is also a lot less heavily armed. These are what its prickles look like. I mean, this is sort of at their worst. They often don't even have many prickles, especially on the upper portions of the stem like we see here. Certainly they're a lot nicer than the vicious hooks you see on a lot of the introduced roses like the dog rose and others. It also doesn't really form like a giant thicket. Like, I mean, this is a bit of a thicket here, but the introduced ones often form like these vicious, dense thickets that are just super hard to get through, where they sort of go loop up and down and can root back into the soil. These ones don't really do that. They just sort of form these straight growing shrubs like this. And here we have another important tree species along this trail. This is Prunus virginiana, also known as chokecherry. I like this tree a lot because it is the earliest tree species to leaf out in the region. Starting in mid-March, you'll see it start to put out leaves, which is earlier than every other tree species around here by almost a month. It does tend to bloom later though, usually around this time of year, like May or June. That's what its flowers look like. Or you might get a better view of them up here actually. Once they're done being pollinated, they produce this fruit that's like a deep red, tiny little berry with a large pit in it and rather tart flesh, hence the name chokecherry. I don't think they taste too bad, but they're not the most palatable on their own, but you can make them to a jelly. You just need a lot of berries to make it happen. But still, absolutely fantastic tree for the region. Some of you guys might know that I make most of my videos in the central Wasatch in Salt Lake County, and though I'm only about 70 miles away, there are some differences in the flora I'm noticing around here. Most notably is the absence of Quercus gambellii. That is a super important plant species in the central Wasatch and further south quite a ways, like into Arizona, as well as in New Mexico and eastward into Colorado. It's a very important tree species in the southern Rocky Mountains, but I'm not seeing it at all around here, even though I'm so close to where I know it grows. I do believe there are some groves in that tree in the Bear River Range, but I'm seeing absolutely nothing in Logan Canyon, and it's really shocking just because it's such an ubiquitous tree species at lower elevations. There's no real reason why it wouldn't be able to thrive here, though the fact that it isn't, maybe I think it's maybe trying to tell me something. I don't know. There's also apparently no Penstemon platyphilus, which is a very common penstemon species in the Wasatch foothills, along with Penstemon cyananthus. I do believe you can find that one here, which is funny because that one is called the Wasatch penstemon, while Penstemon platyphilus is actually for the most part completely endemic to the Wasatch, and we're not in the Wasatch anymore. This is the Bear River Range. That's a mountain range that Logan Canyon sort of cuts in half. Also, apparently, if you go higher in elevation, you will find Pinus contorta, or the lodgepole pine. That's a very, very important species. In fact, it's more weird that you don't find it in the Wasatch rather than the fact that it's found here. It's probably the most abundant single tree species in the Rocky Mountains everywhere. Now, this next plant I found is actually not a super common along here, but I haven't seen it anywhere else in the state of Utah. Most likely, if I'm being honest, that's for a lack of trying. Either way, this is Humulus neomexicana, also known as the Western hops. It's a close relative of Humulus lupulus. which is the hops used in cultivation, mainly to flavor beer. I think it's a really interesting plant. It's a sort of vine, but it can grow sprawling on the ground like this, just like its close relative. Typically found along canyons at the bottom near waterways. And it's in the family Cannabaceae, which is the family that includes cannabis, of course. And in fact, this genus Humulus is the closest relative to the genus Cannabis. When you compare their flowers together, it sort of makes a bit more sense. And right over here we got Salix exigua. So it's a sandbar willow, or at least I think it is. Willows are very difficult, but based upon the way it grows, there's a bunch of mostly tall, straight stems, a few branches, and a big thicket, and the fact that we're at low elevations, getting close to sort of Great Basin habitat. This is the most likely species of willow. Another difference between the forests here and those in the Wasatch that I'm seeing is that this tree species, Juniperus scopularum, or the Rocky Mountain juniper, is a lot more common here. It's a forest-growing juniper, unlike the sort of Juniperus osteosperma you see commonly throughout the West. It tends to grow in more open, dry areas. And it's got thinner branches. That's the main way I use to tell it apart from Juniperus osteosperma, and they tend to hang down like this as well, sort of drooping. It's sort of a cool species of tree. Sorry some of this shot is so dark, but the sun is starting to go down. It's like 7:18 already. But yeah, I'm seeing a lot more of this than I usually do in the Wasatch. And to finish up, we got two close related species that grow right next to each other. Firstly, this one, these large ferny leaves and larger flowers, is Lomatium dissectum, or the Fernleaf Biscuitroot. Or it might actually be Lomatium multifidum. They're very difficult to tell apart species, and it's not fully agreed upon whether or not they are even separate from each other. Like in the Utah flora, there is no mention of Lomatium multifidum, at least not as a species with its own identifying characteristics that you can key out. Either way though, they are, whichever you want to consider this, it's a member of the family Apiaceae, the carrot family. Now, if you're not into botany, you may not realize this, but if you're in the garden you are, it's got this thing called a compound umbel, which it shares with other members of Apiaceae. And in fact, it was the first group of plants to be recognized as a sort of family that are closely related, well before Linnaeus actually. And here is its close relative, or one of its close relatives, Lomatium grayi. It has a similar set of flowers or inflorescence, but its leaves are quite different. They almost look like dill, if you ask me. And yeah, it's like the little segments are a lot smaller. They're not flattened, they sort of exist in 3D, unlike these ones, which are, well, I mean, they do exist in 3D as well, of course, but they're very easy to flatten. These ones are little leaf segments are sticking out in every which direction. Yeah, they're not too hard to tell apart from each other, but they are extremely close related, and I believe it comes down to flower characteristics that really unite them. But yeah, I hope you guys enjoyed this video. I could talk all day about different plant species you can find here, native or non-native, and that's just along this one little trail, but I gotta cut it off somewhere. So thanks for watching. I hope you enjoyed this video, and perhaps see you next time.